have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
USA and Mele Kalikimaka. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Kwanzaa, and Happy all holidays, always.
Well, and it's hard to be happy, of course. This is the week when the tax scam bill was passed. We'll explain why it's
But I
bad.
do have one piece of good news about it.
Good.
But then we'll get back to the bad news. Several federal agencies, as you may have heard, have advised their staff not to use certain words such as transgender, diversity, science-based, evidence-based, and my favorite, vulnerable, in writing grant proposals or budgets.
Several Trump nominees have actually been stopped in the Congress and withdrawn, although about a third of his federal judicial appointments have anti-LGBT records.
We all celebrated.
More could be anti-LGBT.
We all celebrated the election of Doug Jones to the Alabama Senate seat last week, but did you know that Doug Jones has an out gay son who has been giving interviews to the gay press? We'll tell you about him.
The U.S. Catholic bishops have a Christmas present for you, a letter trashing transgender identity.
Yet another trans woman of color murdered, Brandy Sears in Houston.
Now, Bermuda is continuing to move to repeal marriage equality, while the right-wing president of the Philippines, a thug, has come out for it.
For the moment, we'll see whether that stands. Andy is going to review Mark Rylance in Farinelli and the King, and another British import, The Children. And we have a very special Christmas present for you. In the last 20 minutes of the show, our old friend and well-known author, Eric Marcus, author of Making Gay History. Making Gay History.
That's the title of the book.
Oh, Making History, correct. Thank you. And now he's turned all his interviews from that into a podcast, which is Making Gay History. So he'll be here in the second half of the show to tell us all about that.
Great. So, all right, you're going to tell me, it's been a horrible week. Tell me what the good news is.
Well, I did a little research on this tax bill. I have not read the whole thing.
No one has.
But I Googled this. Repeal of the Johnson Amendment. They didn't do it.
Oh, thanks, Ann. That's great news.
It is great news.
The Johnson Amendment was under Lyndon Johnson. It said that if you are a tax-exempt organization, you can't be endorsing candidates and doing politics. Trump has been trumpeting for over a year that he's going to get rid of this, and that was going to allow major donors to give money to churches, get a tax deduction, and continue to take over the country.
And make the churches do all this political work. And millions, billions could have been funneled through churches, right-wing evangelical churches, to support right-wing candidates. That was the plan. I don't know how the right-wing evangelicals let them get away with this, but the repeal of the Johnson Amendment was in the House bill, but not in the Senate bill. And when it came out of the conference committee, no repeal of the Johnson Amendment.
Wonders never cease.
So but the country's going to hell in a handbasket with the rest of this tax bill.
And it's going to take, as has been said, probably a decade to recover from this. And the thing is, people are going to probably get their paychecks next year and say, "Oh, I won the lottery. They cut off $20 out of my taxes." Mm-hmm. But they're going to cut services so badly that your cost of living is going to go up. If people have to understand this in order to fight it.
And they're going to cut Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and all these entitlements. And then the true nature of this will not be seen until you're filling out your 2018 tax returns after the midterm elections and see that, in fact, you can't deduct what you could deduct this year, and suddenly your tax situation is not as good as you thought it was when you saw that your withholding was lower.
All right.
Good luck to all of us.
In other bad news, all these stories started appearing in the Washington Post about how federal agencies like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, and HHS, Health and Human Services, were being advised by major administrators, we're no longer going to be using these words: fetus, vulnerable, transgender, entitlement, diversity, evidence-based, and science-based. So obviously it sounds like it's completely being written by the religious right. What seems to be behind this is, if our agencies are going to get any money anymore, we can't use these with Congress, we can't use these with the White House, so we're going to stop saying them. Now,
the CDC is trying to walk this back a little and say, look, everybody in the world is conscious as they write budgets or grant proposals or whatever of how they write things and how they describe things, and that's all this is. But it's not all this is. The CDC held a meeting with their staff about how to write these budget proposals, and here's the quote that came out of the meeting from the staff. Are you kidding?
Well, the other quote...
That's all you need to know.
The other quote that's coming out of this advisory is that you need to be sensitive to community standards, which is all about, again, appealing to the religious right in these places. So people were incredulous. Credit to the Human Rights Campaign, who we sometimes criticize on this program. They projected all these words on the Trump International Hotel.
That was beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. And it's huge. If you go online, I assume it's available on the hrc.org site. They did it right on the front of the hotel, right over the doorway of the hotel, in huge letters. Perfect. They projected all these things.
And the State Department is now advising its staff, we don't promote sex education, we promote sexual risk avoidance, and this is going to go into PEPFAR documents for AIDS funding and things, and it's going to be promoting abstinence only. There was somewhat of a cut in that under the Obama administration. It's coming back.
And the smoking gun is that all of this was laid out on the Family Research Council website as a plan. This is part of their whole plan for destroying the government and imposing theocracy and all of that. So this didn't just spring up as a natural occurrence in government grant writing or budget writing. This is something that the right wing, as they did with transgender people in the military, this is part of their overall plan.
Judge Lewis Powell wrote this plan in the 1960s, and they've been working on it ever since. We need a plan too.
The other thing is that, HHS, Health and Human Services, has published a question about policy for softer rules for religious providers of care and how they should be allowed all sorts of religious exemptions. So they published this for comment, and they got over 10,000 comments on this. And how many did they publish of these comments? 80. 80. They are concealing almost 10,000 comments.
Well,
and guess what? They picked the ones that were in favor of softer religious exemptions.
We get a few negative comments from viewers sometimes. We don't put those on our website.
No, we answer them and thank people for taking the time to write and take their concerns seriously, because we do care.
Well, not the ones that tell us we're going to hell. All right.
Even those. What the heck?
Trump judges, they actually did withdraw the nominations of two of the most egregious ones, this guy Jeff Mateer and Brett Talley. A lot of it was because they had not only no experience, but they had bad political connections and things.
Well, Brett Talley turns out to be a ghost hunter, and Jeff Mateer says that trans children are the work of Satan. And neither of those opinions helped them in getting nominated to the federal bench.
And you all heard about William Peterson. He was the guy who couldn't answer it. He'd never tried a case of any kind ever. And he was up for a federal judgeship, and he didn't know anything about the rules of the federal court. And that was brought to light by a Republican senator, John Kennedy from Louisiana. And good on him for exposing that. So they say, at least, that they're starting to get the message that they can't just give them anybody.
Well, the other impressive
thing... Even for the Republicans.
The other impressive thing was that they got a couple of Republican votes in committee against Scott Garrett, former New Jersey congressman, very anti-gay, to run the Export-Import Bank. And so they defeated him with those Republican votes and all the Democratic votes. And the reason we care about that is that the Exim Bank used to be run by Fred Hochberg, out gay, longtime activist and government official. So we found it particularly egregious that it should be handed over to Scott Garrett.
He was the highest ranking out gay official in the Obama administration. Now, Trump is still seeking to stop trans troops in court. We've won all these court decisions that say it's got to go into effect January 1st. You haven't got a good reason, but they filed a motion in the Fourth Circuit, which is Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. There are no Trump judges confirmed there yet. There are a bunch of them confirmed farther south, but I don't expect them to prevail.
And now that they've passed this tax bill, you know, that I would like to think that frees up some of the Republicans to have other opinions. The other piece of good news is out of Pennsylvania, where a federal court judge there, Wendy Beetlestone, has approved a preliminary injunction against more Trump religious freedom rules on contraceptive coverage. She says that the Trump attempt to override the Affordable Care Act guarantees of free contraceptive availability is illegal. They went too far. They're not allowed to just override a law like that. So contraceptive coverage is back for women in certain circumstances.
And a bunch of attorneys general are in court trying to stop the end of net neutrality. Puerto Rico did something terrible this week. They passed a bill in the Senate to allow anyone claiming a religious objection to discriminate versus LGBT people, and were urging Governor, what's his name, Rosales, to veto the bill. The governor to veto the bill,
well,
but he's pretty conservative.
This is the same bill that passed in Indiana under Pence that ignited such a firestorm and threats of boycott of Indiana. It's a very broad religious freedom exemption for businesses. It has passed both the Senate and House in Puerto Rico, and I don't think this guy's going to be as subject to the blowback as Pence was. They had to rewrite the Indiana bill.
And we're not done with Alabama, that story. Of course, the Republicans did not seat Doug Jones in time for the votes on the tax bill. But that Alabama peanut farmer who protested him, Nathan Mathis, appeared on there he is with his sign. He had a daughter who committed suicide who was gay. He's very sorry about that. And he was attacking Roy Moore because Roy Moore was attacking people like his daughter and calling them perverts. And so he this week appeared on the Ellen Show and
he told a very cute story.
Yes.
That sign, as you saw, was very professionally printed. He went to a printer to have the sign done. It wasn't something he made himself. And the sign is about how Doug Jones is a pervert pedophile, and that his daughter was, a victim of people like that. And their attitudes. And so he went to the sign maker to make this, and the sign maker said, "Oh, I can't make that sign. It's against my religious principles." And Nathan Mathis tells Ellen, "So I said to him, well, I think sleeping with your neighbor's wife is against religious principles."
That's right.
Outing this sign maker as someone who was committing adultery.
He didn't name names.
He did not, but...
And Ellen donated $25,000 to the Trevor Project in his honor.
And the other cute thing that we found out about Doug Jones this week is that Doug Jones has a gay son, Carson.
Yes, he's a zookeeper in Denver. I have a picture of him there. He came out to his parents 2 years ago. They responded, "I love you." And as for back home in Alabama, he's thrilled with his father's victory, saying, "Unity wins out."
He's pretty darn cute.
Yeah, and he campaigned with his dad. He took time off to campaign for him and helped get him elected.
Yeah. All right. Let's find some. Well, while we're on federal news, I want to celebrate the announcement that next year we're going to have a Sally Ride stamp. Now, my only objection to this is I would rather see a photograph of Sally Ride than this kind of cheesy picture that they painted.
Well.
Well, the other new stamps have photographs. I would prefer a photograph of the real person, but I love the fact that I will be able for the rest of my life to put Sally Ride stamps on my letters.
As long as they're forever stamps.
Well, they all are these days, so I just have to buy a big supply.
All right.
Because I do still use stamps.
Okay, we had another murder of a transgender woman of color, this time in Houston. Brandy Sears, 26. The 28th trans
Seals.
I'm sorry, Seals, I apologize. Brandy Seals, the 28th known person, transgender person to have been murdered in the United States this year. Of course, a record. Of course, this gets reported more now, and people don't get misgendered as much in the news as they used to, and that's.
But it still happens.
And Isa Noyola, who's from the Transgender Law Center, said the solution to all this is not harsher sentences, but to value transgender lives in the first place.
Of course.
Well, that is the problem. I mean, they need jobs, housing, education, all these things.
All right. And in Washington, D.C., at a community center run by a trans woman, the center is called Casa Ruby, they had their second attack from an outsider this year. Some guy comes charging into the building with a can of mace that he used on a trans woman in there. When you are visible, you are also a potential target, and they have been targeted.
Well, speaking of, what about what the U.S. Catholic bishops did this week? It was pretty horrendous. They issued a joint letter from the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops saying that they reject transgender reality, they said, because
I'm glad they call it reality.
Because God created us male and female, and gender and sex cannot be separated. So we want compassion, but we don't want any affirmation of these people. And it's just it's a genocidal statement, and the Pope is in on this too. It's just abhorrent.
I'd like to know where they got their science degrees and what makes them such hateful people in the first place.
Well, and not to put too fine a point on it, but you got your own problems there, don't you? Men who wear dresses, and you've got, of course, it was all pointed out when Cardinal Bernard Law died this week, resurrecting the entire. He hid 500 sexual abuse by priests of children. So anyway, he's unlamented. By the way, in Milwaukee, a Catholic priest named Gregory Greiten, Greiten, came out as gay. He got a standing ovation from the congregation and support from the diocese because he says he's a celibate, but he's gay and he wants to be free. And they seem to affirm it.
Now, when we can get them past celibacy, we will make a real contribution.
Men only.
In Kansas, at Marion High School, a rural high school in Kansas, they had this tradition for the last few years where seniors, I love this thing, could paint their own parking spot. They could decorate it any way they want. Of course, this led to someone doing a Confederate flag and others doing Bible verses and someone doing a Trump Make America Great Again spot.
But Logan Wayner painted his rainbow, and it was vandalized. And the principal backed him up about having a rainbow space, but the school board voted 4-3 to ban painting of parking spaces entirely.
They had complaints from some guy, a parent or a community guy, who came to a school board meeting and screamed and yelled.
And the Westboro Baptist Church.
Yes. So no more painting of parking spaces at Marion High School in Kansas. The entire program has been ended.
On the harassment front, which never ends, the photographer Bruce Weber has been sued by, we have a picture, by a model named Jason Boyce, who says he was asked to rub Weber's genitals during the casting session, and another model, they're both there.
With Lisa Bloom.
Yeah, Mark Ricketson. Vanity Fair canceled Bruce Weber's book party.
There you go. In Boston, it turns out at the Fenway Health Center, a long-standing LGBT health center, the chief executive hid 4 years of sexual harassment charges against an honored doctor there, Dr. Harvey Macadon. The board fired him.
They weren't informed.
Yeah.
They weren't told about it.
Well, that's a bad thing.
Can't hide it.
No. And Abel Cedeno, you have an update on him.
This is the young man in the Bronx who was defending himself against an attack and had a knife and ended up killing one of his classmates. But he is now suing the city of New York. And I was a little like, you're under a manslaughter charge and you're going to sue? I mean, I think he was defending himself, but you're going to sue. And it is to help all LGBT kids who are being bullied in the schools. It's to make the schools do a lot more and enforce their own policies. The only thing he's asking for himself is some help getting over 6 continuous years of bullying and getting some psychological help. But he's not suing for damages.
Good news from Reading, Pennsylvania, where the city council unanimously has adopted a ban on conversion therapy for minors. And in Bakersfield, California, there is another one of these bakeries. This is called the Tastries Bakery. Refuses to make wedding cakes for same-sex couples, got sued by the couples. The state asked for a restraining order against the bakery to prevent them from making any wedding cakes until the lawsuits are resolved. And the court said, no, we're not going to give a restraining order yet. We need more information.
That's what they said. So they're back in court on February 2nd. In Virginia, you probably all read about this or heard about this, that this woman won her seat in the House of Delegates by 1 vote, and that creates a split between Republicans and Democrats in the House of Delegates.
But there are 2 more seats that they have not resolved yet that are going through recounts, so we could still win one or both of those. In Hawaii, there is a strange lesbian divorce child support case going on. The lesbian couple, they had discussed having children, but they hadn't made any particular plan. So one of them is in the military and goes off to war, and the one who remains home decides to get pregnant with the sperm donor. And then the military one comes home, the child is born, and she and the couple decide to divorce. Well, now the military one says, I never agreed to this. I don't want to pay child support. Blah, 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 blah. Lambda Legal is defending the biological mother and saying, hey, you know, you were married. This is part of your responsibility. And you did discuss this, even if you didn't get specific. So it's a little ugly.
So the Winter Olympics are coming up, and Gus Kenworthy, the out gay freestyle skier who is going to be there in South Korea, and he was giving an interview, and he called Trump's attacks on trans troops a direct attack on the LGBT community. It shows more courage to leave the house as a trans person than Trump has ever had to show. Great quote.
It is a great quote, and I think, you know, Trump and courage are 2 words that don't belong in the same sentence. Congratulations to Cleveland, Ohio, where they have broken ground for a new and improved LGBT center.
And congratulations to our member of Congress, Jerry Nadler. He was made the new ranking Democratic member, the ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. So if there are impeachment hearings in 2019, Jerry will likely be in charge.
Well, he wanted it specifically because he has experience with Trump in New York for many years. So he said, if there are impeachment hearings, I want to be part of this. Right. And he will. International news, or you got some more?
We can get on. We can get on to that. Yes, I'll save that.
Well, Bermuda is the headline because, in fact, we told you last week that half the legislature had passed a repeal measure for marriage, and now the Senate has passed it too.
The picture on the screen is of the Bermuda Governor General, John Rankin. He has to sign the bill. That's a formality, although the government in Britain is being urged to get him to stop it, which would create quite a conflict with Bermuda, who would claim colonialism and that. So
look, the fact that that guy in that uniform, that white guy reviewing the black troops in Bermuda, that's why I picked that picture in the first place, to indicate that we had a little colonialism going on. So we are waiting to see what will happen and whether the government in Britain will try to force them to veto that.
But there was another little island that instituted marriage equality.
St. Helena in the South Atlantic, population 4,534.
Come on, Bermuda.
It's a British territory. And there are, I was thinking, if Bermuda repeals marriage, where can you, not that Bermuda is in the Caribbean, it's in the Atlantic, but what about alternatives? And there are, a lot of British territories and Dutch territories in the Caribbean. You can find lists of where same-sex marriage is legal and therefore where it's okay to go.
They won't be able to do it on the ships registered in Bermuda, which was one of the big deals, having these weddings.
No, if this marriage repeal goes through. And, the legislators who passed this say, well, because they're repealing marriage, but they're instituting domestic partnership or civil unions or whatever, and they're saying, look, this is the compromise, and you'll have all the same rights.
We should
blah, blah.
We should say, because I didn't know this, yes, the Supreme Court ordered them to do same-sex marriage, but the Supreme Court, as in New York, is the lower court in Bermuda. There is a high court to appeal all this to, and so they were rejecting essentially a lower court decision, as Mayor Bloomberg did here in New York.
The legislators are also saying, look, marriage legalization is not mandated by the European Court of Human Rights, so don't tell us that we're being inappropriate. What about the big U.S. celebrities who are so connected to Bermuda? Michael Bloomberg, Michael Douglas. Where is their lobbying with the Bermuda government?
Okay. And, well, maybe they can get some help from the Philippines, because President Duterte, and he's this guy who goes around shooting, literally shooting drug addicts on the street. He's a right-wing thug, but he nevertheless met with a group of gay people in his hometown and said that he was for same-sex marriage. Of course, it's going to be tough to change the law, but I'm for it.
He used to be against it quite openly.
And he asked them to nominate a gay person to be in his government. I believe in Trump. But the Catholic bishops and the evangelicals are up in arms, and it's a 90% Catholic country, I think.
Yeah, so don't expect that attitude to hold. In Australia, 3 lesbian couples have gotten waivers to marry or have their marriages from other places
There's a picture of one of them.
Legalized now.
Amy Laker and Lauren Price, who is Welsh.
Now, they got these waivers because their parents were coming to town for their planned civil unions or whatever. And so the government said, well, as long as your parents are spending all that money to come from Wales or wherever, go ahead and get married. We'll waive the 1-month requirement. And for one of the couples, one of the partners is fatally ill and expected not to survive till the end of the year, so they gave them a waiver to get married also.
In Mexico, the front-running leftist candidate for president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, he's entered into a coalition with the anti-LGBT evangelical party called Social Encounter. So
scary.
That is worrisome.
In Namibia, a married gay couple, they were married in South Africa, and they have an adopted son. The aunt of one of them, who was from Namibia, died, and they have taken over guardianship of the son. They are suing for recognition of their marriage in Namibia.
So that they can enter and leave the country.
Yeah.
So they're just applying for an employment. But they did give them an employment permit temporarily.
Yeah. Indonesian news. Well, first of all, the Constitutional Court in Indonesia, by a vote of 5-4, rejected a petition to outlaw homosexuality and extramarital sex.
That's encouraging, but 10 gay men who were arrested in May at the Atlantis Spa in Jakarta were sentenced to 2 to 3 years in prison. Now, 140 were arrested in that raid, and they were charged under the anti-porn laws because they don't,
Well, because homosexuality is not illegal in Indonesia, even though the right wing is trying to make it so, and having lost in court, they're now going to go to parliament. But the government doesn't care whether it's illegal. They're harassing everybody, and they're arresting people for violating the pornography laws just by being gay.
Most of those who were sentenced were workers at the club.
And good news from Tunisia, where there is a new LGBT online radio station.
Radio Shams.
And you can
First
hear it
in the
all over
Arab
the
world.
world.
First in the Arab world.
Yeah.
And, okay, and, all right.
AIDS news. Well, interesting report out of Florida. It turns out that Florida, by the end of next year, a year from now, wants to have in place a comprehensive program that is really going to reduce the epidemic in Florida. They want to have PrEP, pre-exposure prophylaxis in the form of Truvada or whatever, available free at all 67 county health departments, and they are promoting condom use along with that.
Well, I don't know if this all takes into consideration the new landscape with the tax scam bill and what will happen to funding.
Well, that's true. They also are heavily into routine testing for everybody in Florida, which we think there is not nearly enough of, and particularly high-risk testing for both HIV and STDs, treatment for those newly infected, and to make sure those who have been living with HIV are continuing on treatment and at the right levels for that, and doing continuing outreach and education. It sounds like a very comprehensive program.
Florida.
If you have any information about whether they're actually carrying that out,
yes,
feel free to let us know. All right, entertainment news.
Well, the SAG-AFTRA nominations are out. I am a SAG-AFTRA voter. The ensemble of Mudbound was nominated. Dee Reese's film, who did Pariah, out lesbian.
And former Gay USA guest.
Yes. Among the male actors, Timothée Chalamet, the kid in Call Me By Your Name.
You saw that.
I did see it. Of course, I saw it at the Paris Theater where there was a lot of jackhammering going on next door. A little bit affected. It's good. I kept wanting to recast Armie Hammer in the film. He seemed a little old, and he's supposed to be 24. But it's
it's like we wanted to recast M. Butterfly.
It's well done. In TV comedy, Orange is the New Black is nominated. Uzo Aduba for Orange is the New Black. Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin nominated for Grace and Frankie. And in a miniseries, female actor Susan Sarandon and Jessica Lange for Bet and Joan. Why is that being mentioned on Gay USA? Because it's made by gay people.
And it's got a gay sensibility.
Yes.
Yeah.
The #1 cable news show in the country now? Rachel Maddow.
Oh, I thought you were going to say Gay USA.
Well, they don't do our ratings.
Well, because we're not a commercial enterprise.
Right.
But we know we have billions of viewers around the world.
All right.
You want to give us some theater reviews? You saw a couple of things this week.
Two British imports, The Children by Lucy Kirkwood. It's from London's Royal Court Theatre. This has a great cast. That's Ron Cook, Deborah Findlay, and Francesca Annis. Do you remember when she was Lily Langtry 100 years ago on television?
No.
Oh, well, all right. Well, you're too young. It's about what we owe to the next generation, and it's combined with a personal sexual drama about infidelity. It's very well done. Hour and 50 minutes, no intermission. Then Farinelli and the King.
Oh,
this is
much anticipated.
True story. Oh, there he is. There's the great Mark Rylance as the king, King Philip of Spain in the 1730s. This is written by Claire Van Kampen, who was
his wife.
Rylance's wife. And it's about, can the castrato Farinelli, this singer, soothe the king's melancholy? He's totally depressed, lying in his own crap and everything, and is a miserable guy. And one of the wonderful things is this guy named, and you would probably know this opera singer's name, Easton Davies, sings the voice of Farinelli. An actor plays him. And there's just a wonderful line I want to quote from it. At one point, Farinelli says to the king, he's trying to encourage him, "You've given us hope." And the king says, "Hope is a very great responsibility."
Well, I have another opera to recommend that is coming here. We've mentioned this before. an opera called Fellow Travelers about the Lavender Scare, the government discrimination against gay people in the 50s and 60s. And it's been, it's a documentary called The Lavender Scare. It was a book called The Lavender Scare. Now it's an opera called Fellow Travelers, produced in part by our old friend Sterling Zinsmeier, who was politically active in New York. Yes. So I think it opened in Cincinnati, and we talked about it then. Well, now it's coming to New York for a few performances in January at the John Jay Theater on 10th Avenue, and as part of something called the Prototype Festival. So if you go to prototypefestival.org, you can get tickets to Fellow Travelers for its January 12th through 14th performances.
And HBO is picking up Issa Rae's new Him or Her, a comedy about a bisexual black man.
Yeah, and before we turn to our guest, I just want to read you a letter we got from a viewer because it was so heartwarming, especially during the holiday season. Should we include names or not?
I think not, because we didn't ask, did we?
We did not. So this is a guy, 20 years old from Fulton, Indiana, who says, I just wanted to share my story with you. First off, I'd like to say my father, Eric, watches your show all the time.
Thanks, Eric.
At 18 years old, my life was spiraling out of control and I was going down the wrong path. Eric and his husband, Sean, were friends with me on Facebook. I had just found out that I had to find somewhere to live, and Eric just happens to message me. He asked me how I was, and I told him everything. He then offered me a couch to sleep on, and I spent that Christmas with them.
They had 7 children, 2 biological and the rest adopted. They also were the first gay couple to get married in Fulton, Indiana. So when I started to stay with them, I grew more and more attached, and so did their children.
Or I grew more and more attached.
And so did their children. 1 year later, they adopted me. It was the best day of my life. Since being adopted, these men have set me up for success, got me back in school to get my GED, and have helped me to make better life choices.
I'm so grateful. I wanted to share our story with you in hopes you could share it on your show. I want the world to know how amazing these men are and how they have had such an impact on my life.
Thank you for taking the time to read this, and thank you for broadcasting helpful and inspiring messages. I hope this can be one of them.
Yes, it is, and thank you for sending it. It's always great to hear a terrific story like that.
Sounds like somebody that Eric Marcus should interview.
There's a segue. Come on in, Eric. Move over. Merry Christmas.
Oh, to you.
Mwah.
Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you. Oh my God, that letter.
Wasn't that fabulous?
It makes me weepy.
Yes.
Sure. Well, us too.
All right. So Eric is the author of Making History, which was a very important book, published in 1992.
Yes, and the reason you were confused a little earlier is the second edition was called Making Gay History,
Oh,
published 10 years later.
Yeah, that's why I was
We
confused.
couldn't use the word gay, or we didn't use the word gay in the first edition because the publisher was concerned about the capacity of the sales force to sell it with the word gay.
Oh, there are always stories like that.
Yes.
So Eric, as frugal as all of us, when he was doing this book, recorded all the interviews.
I recorded all of them and I used broadcast quality equipment, and I have Jay Kernis at CBS, who was at CBS News then, and where I worked, where you used to work,
Yep.
who's now at 60 Minutes. He was my boss, and I had been my boss, and I asked him what kind of equipment do the people at NPR use, because he had founded a morning edition and worked on All Things Considered. And I called one of his colleagues, and I bought that equipment and used that.
So were you thinking even then when you knew you were doing a book that you might use it for something else, multimedia?
Not that I would, because there was no such thing as a podcast then.
Oh.
And I thought one day a scholar or a student might. I thought these stories were important, and I was recording stories of people who were older, often older, and also men who were dying of AIDS.
And not all the stories made it into the book because there's a limit to the number of pages.
Yes.
So you, in fact, have tons of audio interviews with scores and scores of people, and now you have turned it into a podcast called Making Gay History.
Yes.
So
MakingGayHistory.com.
Yes. So we have very brief excerpts of several of these, and we're going to start with just a very short clip of your audio interview in 2001.
That's right. It's the most recent interview.
With Ellen DeGeneres. So we're going to play the audio and show you a few pictures of Ellen over it with Eddie Luck.
And how long?
It mattered to me always. It always mattered to me what people thought of me. Even though I'd forgotten that for a while, to say, I'm gay and I'm going to say it, and I don't care what anybody thinks, I don't care if I lose everything. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, okay, yes, now I'm gay and I'm free, and then the reality hits like this big wave going, we hate you. We think you're off the air now. We don't want to watch you. We're going to show you when you're that depressed and people are like, but you don't know how many people you've changed, and it's like, but yeah, I'm sad.
And they showed her at the end with her mother, Betty, who got very involved with the movement.
Yes.
So you caught her at a down moment.
I did. It was, her show had been canceled. They were working on the pilot for the new show that didn't make it.
The sitcoms.
That's right.
So the old show was the one she came out on.
That's right, in 1997.
Yes, and so we all remember that. And
At your house.
Yes.
Yes, and I of course was at Ann's house. I didn't see you. Well, you were
Oh,
too.
I took the overflow because I live not far from Ann, and there were a bunch of people who had to be brought over to my house.
I could only squeeze in 200 to my
Yes.
one-bedroom apartment.
And 2 gay men. And that was me, and that was my partner.
Randy Wicker was there, too.
Randy was?
Yes.
I somehow didn't see him.
Randy Wicker is the oldest living gay activist.
Yeah.
But what people don't
From the
know is that
50s.
there were house parties all over the country
Yes.
to watch that episode of Ellen, and we can't imagine now what that time was like. It's very
We had
difficult.
a sheet cake congratulating her.
Yes.
Well, the coming out of Ellen DeGeneres, actually, we were working at Hedrick Martin at the time, actually lowered the age at which kids realized that they were gay.
Yep.
Because it was so much public information. That cover of Time magazine, I'm gay.
Yes.
But she was depressed. She was unhappy.
Yes, she was at the moment I met her. She was. I think she was looking forward to the potential new show, which was not the show we see now. It was a sitcom, but it was a rough period, and nobody remembers that there was a lot of backlash. Her show was canceled. She was scorned. There was all kinds of criticism of her in the press.
Jerry Falwell called her Ellen DeGenerate.
Yes, yes, and she's human, so she was affected by that.
And there were a lot of gay people who were mad at her for coming out.
Yes, because they felt it would hurt them. That kind of publicity would
You're spoiling it for us. You're telling the gay secrets. What?
Yeah, that you're bringing unwanted attention on us. That it'll only hurt us. It's always been the case. People, dating back to the earliest days of the movement, people have been fearful that by raising our heads up, we're going to get whacked.
You're spoiling it for us.
Yeah. There was one photo that we showed in that sequence of a group of young people really excited. That was the University of Nebraska. It was a listening party for Ellen's show. So it was all over the country. And in New York, you could hear people cheering from your apartment. You could hear people cheering in the Chelsea neighborhood in Manhattan for that coming out moment on her show.
And it did wind up on the cover of Time magazine.
Yeah.
So what is she, just to give us a little more tease about listening to the podcast version, what else does she have to say in there?
Well, she talks about the experience of coming out and how she didn't expect to come out in the big way that she did, because she met someone, she doesn't mention the person's name at that time, who was fearless about being open in public and wanting to hold her hand. So she said people got to see me grow like a chia pet. She was so funny and so dear in the interview, and had forgotten I was coming. So I'm not kidding. So I show up on her doorstep, I ring her doorbell, and she says, hello, and I said, with a question mark, and I said, hi, it's Eric Marcus, and she said, yeah? And I reminded her, and she greeted me at the door in pajamas, and was and her hair was a mess, she'd been napping. And she was as sweet and lovely and human as possible. She just won my heart. I was totally charmed.
She's become a beloved character on TV.
Yeah, and she's done such enormous good, and we forget that she wasn't then who she is now.
Right.
We just forget. And a lot of people don't know she's been on television for so long. Young people don't know that history, and they don't understand what it meant to be on the cover of Time magazine in 1997.
And it's also interesting to me that, she did the sitcom where she came out, then she did the sitcom that failed. But she knew, she said at the time, I want to do a talk show. That's what I'm meant to do. And she made that happen, and sure enough, it has fulfilled her prophecy.
Yep, and she continues to do great things for LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
She does. I mean, she kind of eschews politics, but when she decides to make a comment on a political issue, it's powerful.
Well, the thing we showed earlier in the
Yes.
show with the Alabama farmer.
Oh, those things make me cry.
Yes.
Well,
Oh, my
he
goodness.
does. He is just spectacular.
Yeah.
All right, so you can hear the entire Ellen interview with Eric at makinggayhistory.com. And let's move on to our next story, which is Perry Watkins.
Yes, almost no one knows who Perry Watkins was. He died of AIDS, and that's why we probably don't know his story. He was drafted in 1968 during the Vietnam War and was open about being gay. He checked off the homosexual box, expecting not to be taken in. They took him in and kept him for 15 years. Then they threw him out because he was gay.
You couldn't get out of it for just saying you were gay. You had to cut off two of your toes.
He said the white guys got out for being, when they checked off homosexual, the black guys did not.
Wow. And he even performed as like a drag queen overseas.
Simone, yes, he had a drag. Yes, he played this character Simone. When I met him, when I interviewed him in 1989, he was living in an unheated house in Seattle. He had no money at all. His case was working its way through the courts. He eventually won and then settled with the military in 1991. He's truly a hero, but he's forgotten.
We should say that again. He won his case before gays were allowed in the military. He won his case.
Yes, he won a case to be reinstated.
Yeah.
He took a settlement, took back pay. It was the best thing for him. He was the Grand Marshal in the New York City Pride March, and then he died.
The clip we have from your interview with him is about his not being treated well in the military.
That's right.
So let's play that, and again, look at a few pictures of Perry Watkins as we listen to a brief excerpt from his interview on makinggayhistory.com.
Basically, everybody in the unit just kind of accepted me until one night 5 guys decided to sexually assault me.
They assaulted you?
Yeah. They tried real hard. They were not successful in actually completing any sexual acts, but
they tried.
They ran me around pretty good. 5.
You must have been scared half to death.
More than half. But I go in the next morning and I said, I'm not going to deal with this. I want out. That's all there is to it. No, I'm gay and I want out. Do you know what the military did? What they investigated was not the assault. Their only question was, would you give us the names of 2 people you've had sexual relationships with? The fact that 5 men sexually assault another man in your barracks is not of interest to you. Our system of justice, our military system of justice. Oh, that's all right for them to assault you. What we've got to prove is that you're gay. The crime is not that they assaulted you. The crime is that you're an admitted homosexual.
A horrendous story. And I was pictured there with Miriam Ben Shalom, who was the lesbian activist in the whole thing about integrating the military. Did you talk to her as well?
I didn't interview her, no. I don't remember why I didn't, but she would have been a natural interview. There's so many people I wish I'd interviewed at the time, but didn't. There's something that Perry had in common with almost everybody I interviewed. And it's a phrase that I discussed with Frank Kameny, one of the real heroes of the movement. There are so many heroes. It was the word radicalized. That things happened to people, things were done to people that made them angry, and it radicalized them. I often ask people how they had the courage to do what they did. Most often people said it had nothing to do with courage. They were angry, and they were compelled to do something. And they screwed him over. And he decided that he wasn't going to stand for it. And he really suffered during the period between when he was thrown out and when he finally had a settlement.
I joined the movement because a boyfriend dumped me. And I wanted to meet other people, and I was very isolated, and I went to the gay group.
Andy, that was the other thing that I found. It was either people were radicalized or they were looking for love.
Yeah.
So this movement was fueled by anger and by love.
But it is, in all of those cases, it's about feeling compelled to do it. It's not about sitting around one day and saying, I think what I'll do is such and such. No. You do it because it's just the natural progression.
And you hear that in Ellen's interview in particular. She talks about how you have to. She says, you see someone in the river drowning, you jump in. And she felt it was boiling over in her. She had to do it.
And by the way, in reference to what Perry Watkins says about being attacked, the number of men attacked sexually in the military is larger than the number of women who are sexually
I didn't
attacked
know
in the
that.
military. Well, it has to do with the fact that there are so many more men in the military.
Right.
So there is a larger percentage of women, but there is actually a larger number, a real number of men who are sexually attacked in the military to this day.
This happened to Perry just months into his service. I said to him, well, when did this happen? I said, I thought it was years in. His first months, he tried to get out 3 times. He said, I'm gay, just let me out of here. And they wouldn't let him out. And he did a great job. He had a very successful career in the military. So when they finally threw him out, he said, you can't just throw me out without his pension. He had 5 years to go until he could get all of his benefits. And they destroyed him financially. He lost a relationship. And he was determined. They weren't going to get him.
So how many recorded interviews do you have overall?
100 interviews, 300 hours of tape. Yeah, we can go along. People say, well, how many seasons can you go? We're in our 3rd season now. We can go quite a long time. And what you get in these podcast episodes is just a slice of a slice.
Yeah.
So we have an upcoming episode with Morty Manford, who was, with his mother, Jean, co-founded PFLAG.
And he was one of the early presidents of the Gay Activist Alliance.
Yes, very involved from the age of 19. So we only tell really one story in his episode, and I spent, I don't know how many hours, I think I spent 5 hours with Morty.
And are those full audio, all those hours, ever going to be available to everybody?
One day, when I'm dead.
Am I putting you on the spot?
No, everything is at the New York Public Library. So if there's a scholar or student who wants to listen to it, they can make a request. I have to sign off on some of them because there are all kinds of legal issues involved. For people who are no longer alive, it's a much easier thing. For people who are alive, you have to get permission from them as well. One day, I hope that all of these full-length audio, these full-length interviews is available online.
So how many have you published so far?
We've done 30-plus episodes so far.
Yeah.
Some of them we did 2 parts, like Gene O'Leary, Gene Manford, and Morty Manford.
Did Gene O'Leary tell you about making fake subway tokens?
No,
You didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
She was beloved.
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe I did know about that and had forgotten it.
Yeah,
Gene,
well.
for people who don't know about Gene O'Leary, she led the first group of LGBT.
Ex-nun.
Ex-nun. And she talks about how she seduced virtually every nun at the convent where she was.
Yes.
She said God was her witness, or and she was a powerhouse.
Pistol.
Yeah, she led
definitely.
the first group of gay rights leaders to the White House in 1978.
She was the head of the co-chair of the National Gay Task Force at that
Yes,
time
and
with
also
Bruce Feller.
Right, and then she was also at NGRA, the National Gay Rights Advocates, and she helped she co-founded National Coming Out Day,
Yes.
which features prominently in our next episode.
Do you have a favorite of the ones you've published?
What's the next
I
episode?
know.
Finish this.
Next episode, Greg Brock. Nobody knows who Greg is, but Greg just retired as a senior editor at the New York Times. He was out before anybody was out at newspapers back in the 1980s.
He survived Abe Rosenthal.
He wasn't at the Times yet then. He was only at the Times for 20 years, but he was on the first National Coming Out Day on Oprah in 1988.
Really?
And his story is amazing. Yes.
Okay. Well, we've got one more to play for you, and that is Sylvia Rivera.
Yes, most people know who Sylvia is. Most people have never heard of Sylvia. And this is, never heard Sylvia's voice, I should say.
Oh.
And this is a sort of domestic moment. I was at Sylvia's apartment. She was making chili. She needed
Well,
to.
let's say who she is.
Sylvia Rivera is one of the iconic self-described drag queens involved in the Stonewall Uprising.
Street
And-
Transvestites Action Revolutionaries.
Yes, co-founded a group with Marsha P. Johnson. Very complicated figure. Something else that people don't realize is Sylvia was 17 years old at the time of Stonewall.
She was
She was a
13.
kid.
She was 13 when she was on the streets working as a sex worker.
11, she told.
11?
Beginning at 11, and she talks about that in this clip. So you'll hear Sylvia at home. She's forgotten the tomato sauce for the chili. It's a domestic scene, and then she goes on to talk about what it was like to be a kid selling yourself on the streets.
Okay. Sylvia Rivera.
Frank, what are you doing? I just realized you have to go and buy me some tomato sauce. I forgot to buy the tomato sauce for the chili. So could you go around and get that? And, huh?
This is our
Pick up a couple cans, you know. Yeah, nice cans, not the little ones.
Yeah, the jars.
No, not Aunt Millie's. I need tomato sauce. We're not making pasta. But no, It's, you can sell anything out on the streets. You can sell men, young boys, and young women. There's always a customer out there, and they are the ones that are sick. I remember just going home and just scrubbing myself in a tub of hot water. Oh, these people touched me. I mean, it's sleaze. Even if they weren't old, they could have been young. I remember sleeping, when I was 13 and 14 years old, I remember sleeping with guys that were 20 and 21 because they were paying me. And they had their hang-ups.
She had lots of conflicts with the movement. She was thrown out of the LGBT community center, but there is the Sylvia Rivera Law Project. Sylvia's Place is for homeless LGBT youth.
One of the problems with icons is that we don't know them as people. And when you understand what Sylvia's life was like, you have a better sense of why she wound up being thrown out of the center, why she was as troubled as she was. There's a scene in a video clip from the 1970s when she's being thrown out of her shanty on the Christopher Street Pier, maybe the 80s.
80s or even
And she
90s.
says, you think I'm crazy? The world made me crazy. And you get to know Sylvia and you hear about her life, you understand why she had drug and alcohol problems, why she was homeless. Her heart was in the right place, but often she was impossible to deal with.
And she's in the David France film about Marsha P. Johnson.
Yeah.
And just listening to this, I'm reminded over and over again of how important and special it is to hear people's voices.
Yes.
We can read about these people forever. Sometimes we see clips of them in documentaries, but these are intimate interviews, and that is a unique experience.
And I had the good fortune to be there in the room with all of those people, and now I have the privilege of bringing their stories to life through their own voices. I got to do it in the book, in print, but it's so different actually hearing people speak.
Are there a couple of others that you want to tease people with about who's already up there on the site that they could be listening to if they go there now?
They can listen. There are 30 episodes, and I don't want to favor anybody. You asked me who my favorites are. Almost everybody is a favorite. One I didn't like, but is really interesting, is Hal Call, Hal Call took the Mattachine Society, took over the Mattachine Society in 1953 from the founders. But I love Chuck Rowland, Dr. Evelyn Hooker, who did the first study comparing straight men to gay men, in which she demonstrated that gay men were no crazier than straight men. And we know, I don't know if that's such a good thing.
Well, I think we can all agree on that. Let's put it that way.
Yes. So I have many favorites. Someone no one's ever heard of is a guy named Wendell Sayers, whose story dates back to 1920 when he was sent to the Mayo Clinic to be diagnosed as a homosexual.
And as you say, it's not the full 5 hours you did with people.
No.
It's a very handleable chunk.
You can, each episode, I introduce it, I set it up, bring you back in time, you have a little story, and then I do a conclusion to tell you where the person is now. I like to think you can listen to it in the time it takes to fold your laundry, because that's when I listen to it. Or to do your yoga stretches. When you're my age, you have to do them every day, but they range from 18 minutes to 25
Well,
minutes.
this is a great gift to the community to have this, and so glad that you
And
presented it.
absolutely
Thank
free
you.
to listen to.
Absolutely free. Plus, with each episode, when you go to the website, if you click on Read More, there's a whole page of links and information, photographs, so it's great for schools as well.
Brilliant. MakingGayHistory.com. Eric Marcus, happy holidays.
And happy holidays to you.
And to all of you.
And to you, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for watching.